One of the first jobs I ever had was as an employee at a gas station. Everything about that job was miserable, and I get severe anxiety every time I stop for gas now. I worked there for a few years, restocking the shelves, working the cashier, cleaning the place, putting up with the owner's abuse, man, all that kind of fun stuff. It was during my time working here when I experienced something truly odd that changed me forever. I was working an overnight shift, so it was probably around 2:30 to 3 in the morning. I was cleaning up and getting the place ready for the next crew when the chime went off, and when I looked up, the door opened and closed, but nobody came inside. Standing right outside of the door were these two kids, a boy and a girl. They both had really old-fashioned clothing on, and I was wondering where their parents were and why they were up so late on a school night. It was pretty cold outside too, so there was no good reason for these kids to be out here alone. I opened the door and asked if the kids needed anything. They were both staring at the ground, and when they both looked up in unison, their eyes were completely black. They just stared at me, and I tried not to let it show, but it absolutely freaked me out. I told them to come in if they needed anything, and headed back behind the counter. I was trying to convince myself it was just late, and I was seeing things. But I know what I saw. Their eyes were both completely black. The girl grabbed the boy's hand, and they came inside. They both came up to the counter and just stared at me. I was absolutely panicking inside, but I did my best to try not to let it show. I asked them when their parents were, and they didn't respond. They just kept staring right at me with their creepy, beady, little black eyes. I asked them if they wanted to call their parents, and they didn't say a word, and just continued to stand and stare. Every part of me wanted to run out of the freaking store, but I was just in shock and waiting for the nightmare to be over. Then, all of a sudden, a police officer came into the gas station, and the black-eyed children slowly turned, continued staring at me, and walked out the door. As they walked by, both continued to stare at me, and didn't look away for a second. It was by far the most scared I had ever been in my whole life. The police officer got a cup of coffee, and as he was checking out, I told him what had just happened. He, of course, laughed at me and told me that I had just been up for too long and needed to get some sleep. After he left, I locked the door, and for every customer that came in after that, I unlocked the door again, only to lock it once they left. I didn't see the black-eyed children again that night, but I felt like I was going out of my mind, and I kept thinking I was seeing them out of the corner of my eye for the rest of my shift. Once I got home from my shift, I went into bed and was so freaked out that I held the baseball bat all night long. The freakiest thing about that night was my dog was having an absolutely conniption all freaking night. My dog Gordon was a brown lad and was the sweetest thing ever, and he never barked, growled, or anything like that. But that night, he was out of control. He kept barking and snarling at the door, and I'd never seen him act like that in my life. I kept looking out the peephole, but I didn't see anything. But Gordon definitely sensed something that night. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night and was an absolute wreck on my next shift. Over the next few days, I researched online obsessively for the black-eyed children. I discovered all kinds of stories of people encountering them and experiencing the same fear that I had felt. The more I read, the more freaked out I got. What I experienced was not a fluke thing. People are seeing these creepy black-eyed children everywhere. Something bizarre I kept reading about was the hypnotic effect that these black-eyed children had over people. A lot of people claim to be under a spell when encountering these kids. and doing things that otherwise would be completely out of character for them. This struck home for me because I can attest to the hypnotic presence of the children I saw. Everything about their pale skin, creepy eyes, weird clothes, and expressionless faces made me want to get the hell out of the gas station. But I found myself talking to them and trying to help them well after I noticed that there was something seriously messed up about them. I got fired from the gas station shortly after. Maybe it was because I was acting paranoid and distracted all the time, but I couldn't get through a shift without having severe panic attacks. I was dreading seeing those creepy little kids again, and it took a disastrous toll on my mental health. I started having nightmares. My panic attacks got worse. My social anxiety got to the point where I had to be put on medication, and even to this day, gas stations are my only version of hell on earth. I eventually learned to cope with it a little better. I got off the meds, and now I have a steady job with a respectable income, and I'm getting married in July. But I still think about those black-eyed children, and they have changed my life forever. It's hard for me to tell this story. As a Navy man, I think I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to be unshakable. That's the image you get when someone says military, isn't it? That's what the commercials want you to imagine anyways. The United States military is unshakable, and you could be too. Something did shake me though. It's shaken me for my entire life. I was stationed in Cadiz. It was a scenic and beautiful place. Most people in my position transfer in and out of that base without encountering anything beyond the norm. I wasn't that lucky. After seeing what I saw, I couldn't go back to normal. It ruined my career. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. It was late one night, and I was on the beachfront, overlooking a shallow cliff that ended in a sawtooth pattern of the sea and stone. I liked the beach. A lot of us used to head down there to soak in the view. I thought I'd be doing the same thing that night. Then, the screaming started. It began more as yelling, I guess. I heard a commotion coming from the more densely populated section of town. I could make out a few flashlights and silhouettes. There was a group of people searching for someone. I was compelled to help. I started toward them, separated by just a few narrow alleyways. But something stopped me. There was another scream. This one was high-pitched and pained. It came from the direction of the cliff. No one else seemed to hear it. There was too much space and too many buildings between the shriek I heard and the group that had gathered nearby. I could go on and help them, I knew. But then who would investigate the wailing? I ran for the cliff. With the light of the evening constantly growing darker, I barely made out the shape on the ledge. It was a person. Someone was standing on the edge of the cliff. I could make out the line of their shoulders and the slope of their legs. I called out to them. I watched as something shifted. Something moved just behind the figure. Whatever it was, it had been standing perfectly in line with the stranger's body. I saw the arms of the thing that was hiding wrap around the human silhouette. It wrapped them up in a hug. The arms looked like snakes in the dim light. I saw the mouth of the person I was trying to save contort in horror. They wanted to scream again. This time, nothing came out. Those arms were a vice on the stranger's chest, trapping in the air in their lungs. Then, the head of the hidden thing slithered out of its place behind the human being. The head of the creature wasn't quite shaped like a man's. It was too long, stretched slightly too far from its nose to its skull. Something about its face reminded me of an eel. It was ugly. It hated me, and it hated the person it was holding. A voice called out from behind me. I had been noticed, thankfully. The flashlights in the town were pivoting, swimming up to my back. The creature was startled and dove over the cliff. It tore the stranger down with it. Together, they disappeared. I stood in shock as the crowd ran past me. They were yelling, asking why I didn't stop the person from jumping. It was a short fall, I thought. They would have been fine if they had really jumped. But no one else had seen the truth. No one but me knew that the stranger hadn't simply fallen off the ledge. They had been pulled, taken. Eventually, I found myself at the tip of the cliff, standing shoulder to shoulder with the search party. I don't remember making the walk to the edge. I only remember looking down. There was no one there, no person, and no body, and certainly no monster. A few of the others had climbed down to search more closely. We had all seen the stranger go over the edge. The sea wasn't lively enough to have washed them out already. I heard a few of them yell, "Eels! Eels in the water!" To my knowledge, whatever eels might have been seen wouldn't have been deadly. The locals knew something I didn't, though. They ran out of that water as quickly as they could. I followed them around for a bit after that. They were reporting back to the police, who strangely never joined their search party to begin with. I thought I might need to corroborate the story. I thought I could offer some insight into their final moments. Although, I didn't know if I'd really mention the monster I saw wrapped around the stranger's body. I never got the chance to make that decision either. The police didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to talk to the search party. They didn't want to help at all. I thought there would be an uproar. I thought the locals would be furious. But one by one, I watched the hope extinguish from their eyes. They all gave up when the police turned them away. It was like they knew something I didn't. It was like they already had the key to the mystery that I was still unlocking. I tried to get them to talk, to tell me what had happened, but they left me in the dark too. I wondered if it was a local conspiracy. I wondered if the person had committed some crime, and maybe the community thought that giving them up to the sea was perfectly acceptable. I never learned why they'd gone to the cliff in the first place. I never learned why the town was searching for them. I took the story back to my peers, and all they could do was laugh. Cotties has secrets, they said. That didn't satisfy me. That didn't make my skin stop crawling. And eventually, when I couldn't continue on without getting those answers, the Navy cast me aside. They let me fall off of my own cliff. And now, I'm only waiting, hoping that one day, someone will come along and explain what I saw on that day. I've never admitted this to anybody, but I'm now 100% convinced that my dog Maximus was possessed by an evil spirit. A couple of years back, I had two dogs, Maximus and Patrick. Maximus was a black lab mix, and Patrick was an English bulldog. I had Patrick for a couple of years, and he was such a sweetheart, but I felt guilty that he was all alone all day when I would go to work. So, I went to the local animal shelter, and Maximus just stole my heart. He was an adorable little pup, and once I saw him, it was all over. Maximus and Patrick got along incredibly well. They were completely potty trained, knew all kinds of tricks, and were just the greatest dogs I ever had. For a while, I felt like I won the lottery with these guys. The incident I'm about to describe is when Maximus was around 4 years old. My house is on the outskirts of town, with a big backyard, where they had tons of room to play and run around. They both had it made. One day, I came home from work, and there was blood everywhere. I'm not going to get too in-depth on the specifics, because it was so traumatic. And if you're a dog lover like me, you probably don't want to hear the details. But it wasn't just two dogs fighting. Maximus didn't have a scratch on him, and poor Patrick was viciously and brutally murdered. It was nothing short of a nightmare, and the cleanup process was not a quick one. I'm trembling as I write this. Maximus was so well behaved, and up until then, I didn't suspect him at first. I figured something or someone must have gotten into the house and done this. But once I looked inside Maximus's mouth, it was obvious that he had been the one to do this. I buried Patrick in the backyard, and Maximus seemed to really grieve his absence. He would lay by Patrick's grave, and he displayed signs of serious depression for a couple of months. I couldn't believe it. It was really devastating, and I was forever changed. A couple of months after Patrick's death, Maximus's behavior started becoming really disturbing. He would be calm one moment, and then suddenly growl and snarl and snap at me for no apparent reason at all. One night after dinner, I was just watching TV on the couch, and Maximus let out a vicious growl that made me jump out of my seat. He stared at me with a freakishly intense look, and the look in his eye was something I had never seen in him before. I really thought he was going to kill me. As calmly as I could, I walked into the bathroom, and as soon as I shut the door, Maximus started scratching ferociously at the door. He was barking and snarling like a rabid animal, and I was absolutely panicking. He was doing so much damage to the door. I thought he was actually going to scratch the door to pieces and tear me apart. I've never been so scared in my life. Then, after a couple of minutes, he just stopped. I waited a little while and went into the living room, and Maximus was laying on his bed. When I called his name, he calmly got up, wagged his tail, and walked over to me. His paws were all bloody from scratching the door, but he was acting as if nothing happened. Then a little while later, I woke up in the middle of the night, and Maximus was just standing on top of me, staring into my eyes. Usually, he would nudge me with his nose playfully, but I couldn't even recognize him. The dog staring at me was not the dog that I've known and loved all these years, and it absolutely terrified me. Then he let out this low growl, and I froze and didn't know what to do. If he wanted to kill me, it was a perfect time and place to do it. He growled at me for a couple of minutes, and then his expression totally changed, and he hopped off the bed and curled up into his doggy bed and went to sleep. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. Maximus was fine for a while after that. Then one day, we were outside in the backyard, and without any warning, he suddenly charged at the fence and broke through the sturdy wooden Amish-made fence with ease. I can't emphasize enough how strong this fence was, and it would take a sledgehammer for me to make a dent into it. Maximus busted through it like it was nothing and brutally killed my neighbor's dog, Cameron. It all happened so fast, and I didn't know what to do. My neighbors were understandably devastated, and I felt so awful about what had just happened. The cops were called, and I was ordered to put Maximus down. It was so traumatic, and I remember pleading with God, wondering what I had done to deserve this. Maximus seemed like the perfect, sweetest dog, but those 4 incidents will haunt me until I die. One night I was flipping through the TV channels and stumbled across this program about pets being possessed by evil entities. I remember my heart just sank, and it all hit me at once. I know it sounds like a cop-out or some sort of coping mechanism, but I'm totally convinced that Maximus was possessed, especially after hearing the people's stories about their own horrific pet experiences. Sometimes at night, I'll wake up and feel this terrifying presence watching me. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's been happening more and more as time has gone on. It makes me wonder, is whatever possessed Maximus still living in this house? I keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye, and the house is starting to feel less and less like my safe place. It's starting to feel more and more like a stranger's house. I pray not, but is this entity that possessed Maximus now coming for me?